Hey, before we get started here today, I want to thank our underwriter for this entire episode. Our underwriter today is Netflix, and specifically one of their wonderful films that they have out right now called Mank. And I have to say, separate from the fact that they are supporting my podcast and supporting my voice out there, on a personal note, I just want to say that Mank is one of my favorite films of the year, and I mean at the top. It's rare that a film like this comes along. And of course, I find this story so enthralling because it's set in 1930s in Hollywood. And the film itself, it's like taking a look at Hollywood through an entirely different lens, through the eyes of, at the time, a scathing social critic and a great screenwriter by the name of Herman J. Mankiewicz. And in the story that we see in Mank, he has been hired by Orson Welles to essentially write the screenplay for Citizen Kane. And he is under a deadline, and he has to get this done with Welles essentially nowhere in sight. It's such a great story about the story behind Citizen Kane. This film, Mank, was directed by the great David Fincher, whom we all love. But the film itself, this film, Mank, was written by Fincher's late father, Jack Fincher. What an honor to his father, this movie. It stars Gary Oldman as Herman Mankiewicz and Amanda Seyfried as Marion Davies, alongside of Charles Dance, Arliss Howard, and Tom Pelphrey. And let me just say, too, each one of these actors are incredible in this film. You do not watch this film and think you're watching Gary Oldman. Well, let me tell you something. Amanda Seyfried as Marion Davies is like the runaway performance of the year. And it is an entirely different Marion Davies that Mankiewicz and Welles presented in the film we know as Citizen Kane. In this film, you get to see the real Marion Davies that Mankiewicz knew. Mank features the wonderful music of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. This film, Mank, it celebrates the art of filmmaking. And it's about taking responsibility for one's ideas, putting them out into the world, and the reality-altering power of film. So it's no surprise to me that Mank is racking up nominations on the awards circuit from places like the Golden Globes and BAFTA, Screen Actors Guild, the American Film Institute. My friends, this is really an outstanding production. So do yourself a favor and watch Mank on Netflix. I'll have a link to the film right here in the description page for this episode of Rumble. And I just want to thank Netflix for supporting my voice, supporting this podcast, and backing wonderful directors like David Fincher and making outstanding movies like Mank. Hello, everyone. This is Rumble, and I am Michael Moore, and I welcome you to today's episode and this will be our fourth and sadly final episode of our 4-part series that we recorded last week, celebrating the 25 millionth download of episodes of this podcast, Rumble. Millions of you in these first 14 months listening to this podcast. Oh man, it's meant the world to me. And it has been an incredible year, politically, culturally, and sadly, with this pandemic. So anyways, tonight, we're going to have 3 people who have participated in Rumble in its first year. You're going to hear from each of them. And I think that, oh my God, there's just so much going on this week. This is the week for many of us. We went into lockdown a year ago this week. I'll talk a bit about that on a later episode here in the coming week. And what I'm doing, what I'm able to do now, what I'm planning to do. But this continues to be a difficult time for a lot of people, but it's also a time of hope for people who are getting their shots and for the work that we're all doing to encourage our fellow citizens to wear their masks, to keep their social distance, to open up the windows and let the fresh air in, and to use this time to think about how we're going to come out on the other end of this pandemic, how we're going to be a better people, a better country, a better planet. That I have so much hope for. And I look forward to discussing that with you over the coming days and weeks. But without further ado,
she has been a guest on Rumble. I have been a guest on her podcast. She is the co-host with Matt Taibbi of Useful Idiots. Great name for a podcast. She's also, as you know, a comedian and the host of her own podcast, The Katie Halper Show. That means our next guest is the one and only Katie Halper. Katie, how are you?
Good, you?
Good.
I don't know if you can see over my shoulder, but I have a couple books, including one by Matt Taibbi and one by you.
Oh, you do? Yes. Yeah. That's very cool. Wow. I have appreciated the things that you've said about my work, and I've appreciated the fact that you operate without any sense of fear or any real thought about your career. And
as you can tell, yeah.
No, but that's why we know you. That's why we know you. We love you. We love your podcast. We love your humor, because you are so, with reckless abandon, you will just say what needs to be said.
The big thing I like to talk about, woke washing, that's the big threat, in my opinion, is the kind of indirect racism and sexism that we see happening through a lot of policies that are not race, that they're not like de facto, or they're not de jure racist, but they have impacts that are. And, this comes up with something like the Fight for 15, right? $15 minimum wage. I mean, people like to separate that as if economic justice isn't related to racial justice or gender equality. It's like the majority of people who earn minimum wage are women and women of color. Disproportionately are represented among that group. So, that's just something that I think we have to really be mindful of. And don't be afraid to call out the people who are doing bad things, they're not all going to be straight white men. Now, don't use any language that's at all like gendered or racist, obviously. But like Biden is taking these human shields, putting them in front of him. Jen Psaki, Simone Sanders, and this is going to happen. All the people he surrounds himself with, as much as he can, he wants it to be not straight white dudes because he knows it makes it harder for people to criticize them, right? Now, so all I'm saying is that we just have to be really honest about this. And the issue is not like, representation is really, really important. All things being equal, we should, of course, always have someone in power who represents a less represented group. But the policy, that's what's important. That's really what's important. So it's great to have a non-straight white male vice president. That's great. But I would rather focus on the policies that are affecting the countless powerless women of color, people of color. So I guess my big thing nowadays is just reminding people to look at the substance. And again, I'm not dismissing representation. These things are really important, but the impact and who's impacted by these policies. And, watching people push these, I call it woke washing. That's my term for it, which is when, there's greenwashing, when you pretend something's good for the environment and it's not. Then there's pink washing, when you pretend, like Israel pretends that they're really good on LGBTQ rights. So they can distract from the fact that, if you're Palestinian, you're shit out of luck, no matter what orientation you are.
Yeah.
And there's also woke washing, which is when people pretend that it's sexist or racist to question something, or when they try to make, for instance, rainbow Raytheon bombers or pink missiles. So, yeah, that's what I think is the big. That's what I think the big threat today is economic inequality, economic violence, and the attempt to separate economic justice from racism and sexism.
Right, because we're
Oh, you muted yourself. Again, Michael is trying to give voice. He is silencing himself as a straight white man. He's holding the space.
We're using StreamYard here, and for some reason, every now and then, the machine automatically mutes me. And who did that?
It's reparations, I'm telling you.
Racism and the mass incarceration system.
Not good.
No, but somebody figured out how to make money off of racism and how to play off white people's racism so that we could have this mass incarceration system that makes people a lot of money. The misogyny and capitalism, the way that works, the way we make money off of discriminating against women is just like slave labor was like, wow, look at how much work we can get done and not have to pay anybody.
Right.
With women, just think how many billions we save by paying them 20 cents less on the dollar.
Yeah. Not to mention when women are at home, it's unpaid, often unpaid labor. Unpaid. But yes. There's pay equity issues and pay inequality. And, it's not going to be solved by like pantsuit feminism, lean in feminism. None of these issues will be, because basically I think like Republicans want a top 1%, a straight white male top 1% running the world. And Dems want like maybe a 10% that's more diverse. But they're still basically doing the same stuff. It's just a little bit more representative. And that's not the priority for me, for my feminism, at least. The priority is not just making, I lament sexism and double standards wherever they exist. And I'm someone who does not like Hillary Clinton, but I would never pretend that she didn't face double standards and sexism. But my issue with her is that, like, I cared more about, the women in Honduras who experienced a lovely, booming femicide industry after the coup that the Obama administration basically pretended was not a coup and refused to condemn. And because of that, terrible things have happened in Honduras. The Iraq War, she was on the board of Walmart. So these are the women's issues that I think are important.
And when people like Hillary, is a euphemism I'm using, I mean to say when women who are oppressed by an economic and unjust economic system stand up and say they support capitalism, at that moment, they've said they support a system that can only run by paying women less and by making sure they don't have equal rights, that they don't have the right to be paid the same as the man next to them, all that stuff. Once, I remember Trump's State of the Union message, it would have been a year or two, maybe, it was a year ago, when he made that statement, America will never be a socialist country.
Right.
And they cut
I like that blend of like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I know, I don't know what that voice was.
And Trump, yeah. Well, you're reminding us of his Germanic roots, yeah.
Yes, right.
Austrian,
that's right, Germanic, Austrian, that's right.
They used to all be the same anyway. I'm being woke about it. It's not that they're all the same. It's that I'm respecting the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You're welcome. Yeah.
Yes, because dare anybody say anything racist against the Austrians?
I have a lot of leeway there. Leverage, yeah.
Yes, that's
say it through me, Michael. If there's anything you want to say against Germans, just come to me and I'll say it for you.
Okay. Oh, good. All right. I'm going to take you up on that.
Yeah.
But they cut away to the Democrats in the State of the Union on the Democratic side, and they were all applauding.
Oh yeah.
Some of them were standing, and Elizabeth Warren like this, and I'm like, what?
Capitalist to the bones.
What?
I know. That's the thing that, like, we expect this from Republicans, but it would be nice if Democrats didn't actually do this, especially because, as we know, that all of these policies that Bernie pushed and pushes are policies that are overwhelmingly popular. They're not fringe. I mean, that's the big thing that he did. Like, what Bernie did was reveal, more than change public opinion, he just revealed the gap between public opinion and the media elites and political elites who claim to represent the world, and they don't. And, as I would think I was listening to your show earlier today, when you were talking about how, with Rashida Tlaib, who's great, who's been on Useful Idiots and would love to have you on the Katie Halper show, but great conversation on Palestine and also on, the minimum wage and how this is a bipartisan issue and it has support. And she had some great line about how we know, like, if the $15 minimum wage were something else, not the $15 minimum wage, but some issue that corporations wanted, of course the Dems would pass it. like in a heartbeat.
Right.
And, watching Jem Psaki was asked why they were willing to fight harder, the Dems and the Biden administration, for Neera Tanden's confirmation as OMB director than they were to fight for the $15 minimum wage. And Psaki was like, that's really irresponsible, which I don't, show me where it's irresponsible. I don't see what's irresponsible. What's irresponsible is the Biden administration and all the spin that you guys are engaging in. Simone Sanders wouldn't even answer the question on CNN whether or not teachers should be required to be vaccinated. I mean, it's just, to me, this is just subtle Trump bullshit. It's like they don't lie as quickly. They don't contradict themselves within the same sentence the way that Trump did, and his thousands of press people who are always, press secretaries who are always replaced and would implode. But it's not that different. And I'm not doing the false equivalency thing, but I think my big worry with Biden is that people are now let their guards down. They're like, okay, it's back to normal. Oh, good, it's nice. Now we have bombing of Syria that are couth, that are not uncouth, that are discreet. He doesn't make a big deal out of it. It's like, you don't want sneaky, that's do you want Cambodia? Should Biden just pretend it doesn't happen? Should he not even get any approval of it, even less than he already did? So that to me is the big fear. And I think watching, honestly, the media spin for the greatest thing about the media under Trump, besides all the free media they gave him beforehand and all the free media afterwards and during, because they just didn't know I don't think they knew how to handle him. But it was nice that they hated him. I liked an adversarial, if ineffective, media. We don't have that with Biden at all. And yeah, of course, decorum, I guess, matters. But I'm just worried that because there is some decorum, people are going to not be aware of what's happening.
Right. So what do we do? Because I listened to your podcast, and
there you got it. You just named the thing. That's what you do. That is that you want world peace. Every time you listen to the Katie Halper show or Useful Idiots, you're a download closer.
Right. Well, that's your contribution to helping us think about what's going on. But what's the next step? What else do we need to be doing here than just listening to you or me on this podcast? What can people who are listening to this do? Because a lot of people, in some ways, even though I tell them, you shouldn't give up yet, because we have had some success. It's not maybe the success we would have wanted, but you can't say it's not something that if Georgia doesn't tell you anything. Yeah,
right. But look what happened with Georgia, right? I mean, this is not to burst anyone, not to be a downer,
no,
right?
But that's your job. Someone's
got to be the downer, right?
That's you. So go.
When you're looking for a downer, go to Katie Halper. But no,
I mean, one of the funniest women in America when you want to be really down about what's going on.
Well, you got to. It's like laugh instead of cry, or laugh and cry. But right. I mean, look at what Georgia did. They ran on the $2,000 check, and then they're not even doing that. The Dems aren't even doing that. And you know what I have to say? I think one of the most important things right now is to remember / learn. And have you had Thomas Frank on the show?
I have, yes.
Yeah, you have, right. So Listen Liberal is one of the most illuminating books for me. And we have to remember, and this is a big part of Listen Liberal, is we have to remember that it's not that Dems can't do these things and would like to, but their hands are tied. It's that they don't want to do them. And that is a really important, I think that's the biggest part. One of the most important things about the Bernie Sanders movement was that he normalized outrage because and drew attention to what's abnormal is the status quo, right? It used to be reversed. Outrage and anger were weird and abnormal, and we should just accept the status quo. And then thanks to a movement that he really, and he is, I like to call him a crotchety mensch tradition, and my people have. But, he's a little curmudgeon-y, but he's angry about all the right things. And then you have these pearl clutchers oh, I don't understand why he's so angry. Why does he have to yell all the time? It's if you're angrier at Sanders being angry than you are the things he's being angry at, you really need to do some spiritual, soul searching. But I think that the one of the most important things to remember or to be aware of is that it's so tempting for the left to say and think it just has to be that way. We'd love it another way. And it's tempting for the left who doesn't. There are two groups of people. There's the disingenuous and then the people who don't really know. And so the disingenuous people are Biden or Psaki saying that their hands are tied. They can't really do anything about $15, pretending it's some parliamentary thing. The parliamentarian who, by the way, Republicans fired their parliamentarian. So Let's be real, right? And that's a really important thing. Remembering that it's not about ability. The will exists among the people. It doesn't exist among the media elites and the political elites. And there is like a feedback loop, right? Because you have politicians go on these shows, and the people on the shows, I think half the time they know that these things are possible. They know Medicare for all is possible, and they are pretending that it's not possible. And half the time they themselves are drinking the Kool-Aid, or it's some mixture of all of them. But I think that is really important. The idea that the myth of the pragmatic. None of these things are pragmatic. It's not pragmatic to not make people earn a higher minimum wage. That's not pragmatic. It's like it's a really dangerous tool that they use. It's this kind of neoliberal technocracy, pseudo expertise, where they pretend that it's just about, we'd love to be able to do it this way, but unfortunately the Republicans XYZ. The Republicans don't ever do that. They come, the Dems show up to a gunfight with a knife, but the big lie is that they don't have guns. I can't believe I'm saying this with Bowling for Columbine, but forget the gun, problematic gun nature. The point is that Dems show up with their hands, one hand tied behind their back, but not because it was tied. They tied it, or they asked someone to tie it behind their back, to use a less, violent image. Just kind of a weird one, if I'm being honest. But
what I want you to do is tell us why, as you say, the Republicans, when the parliamentarian doesn't do what they want him to do, they fire him. Democrats don't do that. Also, the last time we got a minimum wage increase ages ago, it was part of a defense bill,
right, which
had nothing to do with a minimum wage. Yet they didn't care. They just put it in there and they said, vote on it.
Right. Yeah, well, because not to sound like a cliche, but, and your viewers probably and listeners know this, but, the Dems are beholden to a lot of the same donors that the Republicans are, and the same interests. There's some difference, but certainly not enough difference. There needs to be a lot more of a difference. So I refer and I defer to wonks on this issue, but you can see I had Matt Brunig on. He talked about how, all the ways that Kamala Harris knows the law more than a parliamentarian. I mean, she was a lawyer, did a lot of bad things with that degree, but she is a lawyer. So it's always a question of, where there's a will, there's a way, as corny as that is. It's true often. And we've seen that. And, I do think that it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition, the Neera Tanden versus the Fight for 15, because a lot of people are talking about Tanden, how, look, her mean tweets about Republicans were probably the most redeeming things about Neera Tanden, if I'm being honest. That's great. But here's the thing about Neera's Twitter presence that I think is actually relevant. And I've done some shows where I'll read them on you can see it on my YouTube show. I have some visuals too. She pretends to care about online civility and about, fighting misogyny and hate and vitriol. And she herself engages in very combative and mean-spirited tweets. But that's one thing. The other thing that she does is that she has an army. She calls it an army. She's told Jim Zogby on Twitter, if you try this BS again, because he said something remotely critical of Cory Booker, she's like, an army will rise up. Or an army will rise up against you. And she refers to people in her army. She writes happy birthday, my friend, you're a treasure. And these are people in her Twitter army who say things like, Bernie Sanders is a fake fucking Jew. I want to cut off his wagging finger. I mean, violent stuff. They said violent stuff to a lot of women, sexual stuff. It's disgusting. And so now why do I bring that up? It's because that is what we see Tanden do in the real world is something she does online too. And this goes back to the same thing that we really have to be vigilant about, which is that she weaponizes identity politics and weaponizes lived experience. She talks about how she grew up in Section 8 housing. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to Twitter, she weaponizes civility politics. And so, the reason I'm bringing this up,
she tweeted awful things about me.
Oh yeah,
she just made up crap or weird stuff that when people read it, they're like, "Who is she?" She wrote in 2016 that Michael Moore is hoping that Trump wins.
Yeah,
what is that? I don't even know what that means.
I mean, first of all, you worked harder for against Trump than she ever did. She probably just only helped Trump, honestly. But you actually were, out there after Bernie didn't win, doing the noble thing of trying to get Trump defeated by these.
Right. Right.
Anyway,
I know, but I never paid any attention.
But that aside, but the reason the only reason I think it's interesting and important is because it's a similar thing. It's like it's stunning hypocrisy, and hypocrisy. Who cares about hypocrisy to some extent? Because it's all over. It's like when people are saying the Republicans are being hypocrites because they're going after mean tweets, and look at Trump. It's like, yeah, of course they're hypocrites. Like Trump, that was his whole brand. In fact, he had like a hypocrisy get out of jail free card because he didn't claim to have any moral consistency. He would just do one thing and another thing. So it was almost like it was a built-in freedom to do whatever he wants. But like, of course, since when do we think that the Dems are held to the standard that Trump is? So like, that's stupid to point out that, oh, these Republicans are not being in good faith when they stop Tandon's nomination. Like, of course they're not. But the thing that's interesting is that, Tandon and all of her supporters watch this. There's definitely a talking point with the lived experience. It's like weird Stepford Wives. Everyone's saying it. Her lived experience. And they talk about the fact that she grew up in Section 8 housing. And that is really relevant. And it would be very admirable if she, because of her experience growing up in the face of a lot of economic adversity, if because of that, and racism and sexism, if she then, because of that experience, were committed to making sure that there were programs like Section 8 housing, there was a welfare state, a robust welfare state for other people. Right. But what she does is she grows up, she escapes from this poverty, and she then tries to condemn everyone who's still there to not having the programs that she had because she tries to cut things. And she pushes austerity. And in a weird way, it's even more dangerous than when the Republicans do it, because when a Republican does it, everyone knows that they don't like the welfare state. But when neoliberals do it and weaponize identity politics and talk about being that, young woman who knows how hard it was and they got through thanks to grit, it's like, it's not all grit, lady. There's a lot of people of grit. And if you don't have the actual welfare, the safety net, your grit may not get you through. Right. Anyway, that's like the American dream mythology.
Katie, I've just been informed that a friend of yours has just entered the green room.
Nice.
And she's going to come out here. And please, everybody who is watching or listening to this, welcome the former National Press Secretary for the Bernie Sanders campaign, a contributing editor at Current Affairs Magazine, and now the co-host of the podcast called Bad Faith, Briahna Joy Gray. Briahna, are you there?
Hi,
yes. I'm here. Hi, Michael. Hey, KT Helps.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I haven't seen you in like a week or something, maybe 2. Bree's a frequent guest on the Katie Halper Show live stream.
Yes.
One of the faves, yeah.
Did you consult, Briahna, did you consult with Katie before deciding to do a podcast in terms of knowing everything's involved, what's involved? Because maybe if I had talked to her first, I would have maybe at least paused for a minute to think about if you want to do a good job at this, you must put in a lot of time.
Well, I didn't consult with Katie, but this is my 3rd podcast in life. So
I was on your podcast when you had the Bernie podcast.
Right? Yeah, that's right.
Was there a podcast before that?
Yeah, as an anonymous citizen, I had my own podcast called Someone's Wrong on the Internet, which I stripped from the internet when I joined the campaign because I didn't feel like Bernie Sanders should have to answer for my opinion on Oscar-winning movies or any of the other.
So, but what would have been if somebody had found this out that you had this anonymous podcast pre-Bernie? What did you say on any given episode that would have caused a ruckus?
Well, we had nuanced conversations about difficult subjects, right? Which doesn't really fly in a political atmosphere when you have, to your guys' earlier conversation, folks like Neera Tanden out in the world trying to pretend to cast even good things in a bad light. So I think our most popular episode was about the Me Too movement and trying to tease out some of the nuances there and why we weren't having a bigger conversation about what accountability and rehabilitation looks like that would enable people to be more honest about the bad acts that were coming out at a rapid pace at the time. So probably something between that or the episode where we talked about The Shape of Water, and there was a lot of conversation about the ethics of having sex with a fish.
Right. Can you imagine Bernie being like, look, I refuse to comment on the fish-human intercourse that was depicted in that movie, and my press secretary's review of that movie in no way represents my campaign's views on that. And in fact, I think it's overrated, and it was a little contrived, and I expect more from that director. But...
Katie, you kill me.
I can actually hear him saying that. and sounding believable. But can I go back to what Katie and I were talking about when you were there in the green room there, Briahna, near a tandem? And I don't want to spend a lot of time on her because I think we should be talking about other things. But she would post the most vile tweets about attacking people on the left. Anybody that would disagree with centrist Democrats was evil. And you're right. She had this army, and they would, when it would be announced, like, oh, Michael Moore is coming up in a half hour here on MSNBC. Oh my God, the hosts of the show would be inundated with these tweets from the sort of what I call the tandem Democrats, and they were just like, you must never have him on again. You must not. This is, and I don't know if anybody started listening to it, but I remember in the commercial breaks being told we're under heavy artillery here from Democrats, having you or Bernie supporters on.
Yeah, every time you went on TV, you would trend on Twitter before you even appeared or opened your mouth. The promo would say, and Michael Moore coming up at 8. And immediately
negatively trend. And
the idea that there existed some cohort of Bernie bros was, of course, most hurtful, because there did exist an army that was pretty vicious, pretty explicitly racist, ironically. Recall that this is an overlapping cohort with the chocolate donut crew. So a lot of these people have like donut emojis in their names, the same way that a socialist might have a red rose in their name, and the donut is meant to be evocative of a moment where Senator Nina Turner was disrespected after trying to get her the progressive viewpoints heard at a Unity Commission meeting. So they basically told her she couldn't enter, and then put bottles of water and donuts outside for her and her supporters. And she gave an impassioned speech saying, this isn't about donuts. I'm not going to be bought off by donuts. These are the things that matter substantively to millions of working people, et cetera. And a lot of folks decided that they were going to deride that moment, which, if anything, was a moment of real integrity for Senator Turner and a real moment of shame for the people who barred her from the conversation, and put donut emojis in their handles to mock her. So this is true. You can see there's this choice. So the same people who are pretending that they're this racist horde of Bernie bros have actively chosen to identify themselves with a very particular brand of misogynoir that Senator Turner experiences online.
And so he does too, of course.
Well, and racist, the chocolate donut.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
So the hypocrisy, the hypocrisy stings. I think none of us would really care. The Bernie bro narrative wasn't really hurting. I mean, Bernie. I mean, we were doing very well until the moderates all dropped out, and Barack Obama chose Joe Biden to be the next president of the United States. But in this moment, now that Neera Tanden is pretending to be, indifferent to online shenanigans, and to say that it's just Twitter and it doesn't matter and yada, 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 after she was the ringleader of stirring up antagonism against Bernie Sanders on the basis of anonymous tweeters. And double on top of that, the fact that she actually has a relationship with the people who are doing aggressive, misogynistic, anti-Semitic tweets, ableist tweets on her behalf, whereas obviously Bernie Sanders wouldn't wish the head of the New York Times happy birthday, but there's this implication that he has this relationship with the tweeters. Neera Tanden is actively saying happy birthday, my friend, and throwing her arms around these people in pictures, and she disclaims that relationship or that it matters. So that's where we are.
Yeah. And the reason that, I was not as eloquently as Brie, of course, trying to make this point, and I didn't get it this far to wrap it up, but the parallel also, I think, is the weaponization of it. Like, it reveals the willingness to just weaponize really take advantage of really terrible things. Like, there is online abuse. There's obviously racism and sexism, and there's misogynist language and racist language. And then to pretend that you are on the side of the people at the receiving end of that, but actually elevate people who engage in that reveals the same kind of disingenuous hypocrisy that is revealed when she invokes her growing up, her life being on Section 8 housing, and then uses that to, at the same time, push for policies that actually cut those programs. So that's, I guess that to me is like what's stunning about it. The hypocrisy in itself isn't surprising or interesting, but it's kind of, it's an invitation for people to look at what is the real motive. Like, what's the real motive of invoking your childhood? What's the real motive in portraying all Bernie supporters as sexist, racist? And it's really to push policies. It's to try to kneecap the left by presenting the left as this monolithic, racist, sexist, problematic group of people. And it's also try to sanitize your, really craven, venal, punitive policies that you're pushing when you're near Tandon or Biden or Hillary Clinton.
Amen.
So politically, if we had just a few minutes left, where would you spend your attention here? Because we've talked about so much tonight on Rumble, but I thought, of course, each of you bring a whole different viewpoint that I enjoy greatly, and so I was hoping that when I get on there, I'm going to let him have it, or Mike's just a little too squeaky happy right now or something. I don't know what it is. He got his second shot. So,
Oh, Mazel tov.
He's
Congratulations.
I have to tell you, mentally, I have done a 180 since getting that second shot the other day. I'm like, even though, you're not totally out of the woods for 2 or 3 weeks after you get that second shot, the full immunity, it does not take place right away. So, you still have to be careful. But I just feel like I've just been shown the light at the end of some tunnel. And I don't know if that's true or not, but you guys are young. So I'm just curious how this has impacted your life, because man, I'd be pissed at your age if I had a year ripped from me. Taking a year from me now, once you're past 50, 60 years old, you're like, oh yeah, fuck it. I've had enough of these. The next one's just going to pretty much
spare years.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And it's not that I still don't have things to do. I got a lot on my plate and a lot in my head that I think can make a difference. Nonetheless, I'm just curious how you guys, maybe that I don't know if this is a political question, but I'm curious because I know both of you. I'm just curious how you are holding up, how you've come through this, and what are you looking forward to the most once we're on the other side of this pandemic?
I think that relatively, I'm doing fine. I think that I am the only. I take the quarantine more seriously than I probably should, and like literally don't leave my studio apartment. But part of that is because I'm a Leo and extroverted in some ways, but also very much enjoy a great deal of downtime in between. And the worst thing about my periods of sloth before COVID was the peer pressure to be out enjoying a sunny day or socializing. And now that external pressure doesn't exist at all. In fact, I'm doing a patriotism by staying inside. So, it's probably not the best habit. And of course, the things that I miss most are actual vacations, like being able to get on a plane and go somewhere and like meet up with friends and stuff. And I do miss the atmosphere of a candlelit restaurant, downtown New York, in walking distance, dishes I don't have to clean and all of that. But, I feel very lucky in the grand scheme of things. Oh, also, being able to not have to do a virtual video dating scenario. I don't love that aspect of it. But other than that, I'm a happy camper, all things considered.
Okay, so speaking of dating, Governor Cuomo, how long do you give him? What we have an office pool going on right now of everybody has picked the day that he will resign. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the governor. And if you want to get in on the betting.
What do you think, Katie?
I don't know. I mean, it's definitely was not going to be the thousands of elderly people he bet. He sacrificed so that his donors could,
that should have iced them. That should have iced them.
So it's just a question, I guess, of how the more local the politician, I guess, the easier it is to actually look into sexual harassment or misconduct allegations. So, if if he were mayor, I'd be more optimistic. But the fact that he's a governor, I'm more optimistic than I would be if he were a presidential, a senator, let's say, or a presidential nominee. So that's where I'd place him. But what do you think, Bri?
My position is always, unfortunately, probably to start in a kind of a cynical place. I'm surprised the presumption is that he's going to step down.
Right.
People have weathered a lot worse, as we've all acknowledged. Frankly, not that we need to be ranking what's worse or bad, but like the stuff that had already transpired with respect to him sentencing all of these elderly people to death and limiting liability and all of that should have been enough. Yeah. Right. And obviously the nature of allegations of sexual misconduct tends to grab headlines more than sentencing people's grandparents and uncles to death, unfortunately. So it's going to be more difficult for him to worm his way out. But I could see a world where he just stays out of the media. He adopts the Biden line, which Biden has already reissued, which is that every claim needs to be thoroughly investigated and women need to be heard. Right. So long as you're heard, it doesn't matter if there's any accountability. You know, stick some Mr. Potato Head ears on the side of any inanimate object, and you are heard, woman.
Right. The sound waves were
Well, because one thing about this, I think, in terms of the serial nature of this sort of thing, if he really is that, it's not one woman, it's not two women, it's not three women. It's there's probably a lifelong.
But I think that sometimes can be used against, you never know if someone could do something bad and then have like a eureka moment or out of self-interest. It doesn't have to be a moral thing. I guess there's a slight, I think, danger with that presumption, because then what if you are someone who either was assaulted or harassed and either no one else wants to come forward because they've seen what's been done to you.
Because somebody did it only once, right? And then
or they've done it multiple times, but no one else wants to come forward.
So you think it's not, he doesn't have multiple things.
But also there are going to statistically be people who only do it once.
Thanks for giving me your 2 cents on this, because it's a discussion we should continue to have, because it's a lot of people give the liberal answer, but they don't really necessarily. It doesn't seem like so many other things we've discussed tonight. They don't really believe in it. They don't really want to fight it, whether it's the $15 an hour minimum wage or, everybody wants to turn the other way. And nobody wants to think about how this president, who I voted for, on his 37th day in office, bombed another country. So it's, these are the terrible truths sometimes that we have to face, and to not talk about them, I can tell you from history, will do us no good, and we will suffer as a result of it. And you should listen to Bad Faith whenever it's on, with Briahna Joy Gray and Virgil Texas, and also to Katie's 2 podcasts, the Katie Halper Show, and the one she does with Matt Taibbi, Useful Idiots.
Yeah. Michael, I also was told by Virgil that he wanted me to say how much he loves you and your show and admires you, and says he would be happy to be a guest.
Okay,
and his feelings are a little hurt that I've been on twice and he's never been on.
Look, he's not he's a dude. You got to work twice as hard. That's Michael's policy.
He's a man of color.
I know he is an MOC, but he doesn't usually cite that.
But wait a minute. Hey, Basil Virgil was there when we were in New Hampshire. He was on the podcast, right?
He was sick, actually.
Yeah. Oh, he was sick that day. Oh, right.
Yeah.
We did a thing with all the Chapo people there during the New Hampshire primary. Okay, definitely I'll have him on. He first of all, he has a sick day that he's owed.
Yeah.
on our podcast. So yes, I will make this up to him. Tell him definitely. And thank you, both of you, for participating in our little 25 million celebration.
Yeah,
congratulations
really.
again. Yeah.
But thank you, both of you. Please keep doing what you're doing. I love listening to your podcast, and I love your fearlessness about this, because when I listen to you, I know, and I said this to Katie earlier, it's so refreshing to listen to somebody who doesn't put their career first. that you're not, whatever you're saying into the microphone, you're not also thinking, how will this help me become a professional pundit?
Regrettably, that's true.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I know.
Thank God for small.
I know your parents are listening to this and going, Mike, don't
It's
encourage
useless degree
them.
behind me.
Yeah.
But I think that the world will be a better place if you stay the way you are, and you, as people, will be better off staying the way you are. So that's my 2 cents of encouragement. Thank you very much, Briahna Joy Gray and Katie Halper, and I will see both of you soon.
Before we go any further, I want to again thank our underwriter for this episode of Rumble, Netflix, and thank them for providing us with one great film after another this year. And the film that I want to highlight right now in thanking them is they this year gave us the incredible The Trial of the Chicago 7. It is absolutely one of my favorite films of the year. It's the kind of film you want to see a second time, which I already have. It was written and directed by the great Aaron Sorkin, and it's certainly one of the most celebrated films of this year. The story surrounds the 1968 Democratic National Convention that took place in Chicago. And of course, it's during the Vietnam War. A whole bunch of things are going on. It's the year that Martin Luther King is assassinated, Bobby Kennedy is assassinated. Tens of thousands of protesters had decided to come together, to come to Chicago and have their voices heard. At the time, there was a Democrat in the White House, Lyndon Johnson, and he was sending hundreds of thousands of young Americans to Vietnam, many of whom were coming back in a casket to fight in a war that nobody was quite sure what it was about. And a huge, huge protest movement had erupted against the war. And they decided to have a peaceful protest at the 1968 Democratic Convention. It turned out that once they arrived, the Chicago police and the National Guard had other ideas. What was later described by historians as a police riot, not a riot of protesters, but a police riot. The Chicago police went berserk and committed thousands of acts of violence against these peaceful and unarmed protesters. The organizers of the protest, including Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, Tom Hayden, Bobby Seale, were arrested and charged with conspiracy to incite a riot. The police were the ones who were committing the riot, and the trial that followed ended up being one of the most notorious trials in American history. This movie has an incredible cast. I mean, seriously, everybody, you've got to see this film. Sacha Baron Cohen plays Abby Hoffman. Eddie Redmayne plays Tom Hayden. Bobby Seale of the Black Panther Party is played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II. Man, an incredible cast. It also includes Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Mark Rylance, Frank Langella, Michael Keaton, Jeremy Strong, can you believe this? John Carroll Lynch, Alex Sharp. But of course, if you were an actor, you'd want to be in this film because it's so brilliant, so smart. And that's no surprise because it was written and directed by Aaron Sorkin. It has already won the Golden Globe this year for Best Screenplay. The film is rightfully being recognized by everyone on the awards circuit, including the Golden Globes, BAFTA, Screen Actors Guild, Directors Guild, Writers Guild, Producers Guild. You're getting the gist of this, right? American Film Institute, and many, many others. Maybe the most acclaimed film of the year. Aaron Sorkin's screenplay and his direction tells a powerful, relevant story for right now about injustice, racial inequality, and the noble pursuit of protest against a noxious establishment and a government that is in the wrong. So listen, friends, if you haven't seen The Trial of the Chicago 7, please, I urge you to check it out on Netflix. And I'll have a link to the film right here on the description page of my podcast. And again, I thank Netflix for supporting my voice, for supporting this podcast, for being our underwriter today, and also for backing wonderful writers and directors like Aaron Sorkin and making absolutely outstanding films like The Trial of the Chicago 7. We're back here to close out tonight with Sam Riddle. He is the host of Riddle at Random, which is on every morning on Superstation 9:10 a.m. in Detroit, Michigan. I've known Sam since I was probably 17 years old. He's just a few years older than me, but he's well known in the state of Michigan as one of the black student leaders on both the campuses of Michigan State and the University of Michigan in the 1960s. He is a Vietnam-era veteran, came back to Flint after serving in the Army, and went back to school in Ann Arbor, went to law school there, and used his law degree to help do more organizing and more political activism throughout the state of Michigan. He was a co-founder with me of my newspaper in Flint, the Flint Voice, and his is a voice, I believe, that needs to be heard, as it's always been heard in Michigan. But I want people to hear him across the country and across the world. We don't usually get to hear voices unfiltered like Sam's. And I'm fortunate to have him with us here as my final guest on our 25 million download celebration.
Sam, are you there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
But one of the most interesting things I've seen when I listened to you today and also just reviewed some of your previous shows, Michael, I too, despite Tuskegee, I took my first Moderno hit at a Meijer store. The same Meijer family that gave us, Michael Moore, that Republican congressman that voted to impeach Trump.
That's right.
Who freed Kwame when these phony-ass white liberals wouldn't do it. 28 years was too many. Trump did free Kwame. Not that it justifies anything Trump's ever done, but it meant something to a lot of the streets in Detroit. And see, in Detroit, what we're dealing with is almost diametrically opposed to a lot of the conversation I've heard today. See, in Detroit, the folks in Detroit have been subjected to one bitch slap after another. Whether it's a governor that's held in high esteem by much of the liberal, so-called progressive white folks and their jackleg, handkerchief-head Negro enablers of the status quo. This is the same governor in Michigan, Michael, that said there was no data to justify keeping the water on for America's blackest and poorest city. And then the coronavirus pandemic hit that literally turned Detroit into a slaughterhouse. We were the ones filling the body bags out of proportion.
Right.
And they kept playing these PR games with us. Right now, last data showed, and it's increased since then, only 3.7% of the people taking shots were black. And some of that, and it wasn't just because of hesitancy. It was about availability. It was about being able to get to where the shots were being given. It was about the fact that not only has poverty been criminalized, but poverty has resulted in deprivation of these shots. I like to think that's being changed even as I speak. Matter of fact, I got my shot at a Meijer store, as I said earlier, and I've got to take my second Moderno shot. And I don't know, when I listen to all these political discussions, I couldn't help but think about the reality of a Detroit, of a Flint. See, there we look almost bemused. And our friend Dan Kildee, for example, whom I love, but we look at the Congress people in Washington, many of them talk and speak as if they should be awarded medals for enduring the fear of that January the 6th. But what those congressional representatives felt in Washington with that mob of insurrectionists, every day the east and west side of Detroit and the north end of Flint knows that same fear as they huddle, held hostage behind those bars, barred up windows and doors because of the poverty that results in so much crime every day, every week, 24/7, Folks are held hostage to fear. The fear that the congressional folks felt in Washington is felt every day throughout Black and brown America. So folks just kind of smile and look at what's occurring and just shake their head, because they're going back to a reality where the pit bull is the security force. They know when they pick up the phone, the police ain't coming. They're not coming. Not soon enough. Not soon enough. And the Capitol Police couldn't come. The National Guard didn't come for whatever reason. Well, that's the ugly reality of the streets of Detroit, of South Central Los Angeles, of East St. Louis.
Or Washington, D.C., which is a black city.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. See, we get subjected to a form of a bitch slap 24/7 when it happens to congressional representatives. It's, oh, woe is us. But hell, it's woe is us 24/7. And the only reason I speak like that is because I think in listening to the show, I was listening to Ellsberg. And of course, we remember when Ellsberg's hair was dark and seems like not that long ago. And I look at him and now he's approaching 90 years of age. And I think the older we are, the more cynical we become about the reality. You know, we elected a president that didn't receive many votes for himself. He got the votes because we didn't want Trump. I voted for Biden, not because I like Biden. I know Biden's history enough to wonder how I could ever have voted for him. But I did because the only option was Donald Trump. And we wanted Trump gone, just gone.
Yeah.
But when we look at what's facing us right now, Michael Moore, I got to tell you, you know, we didn't elect Joe Biden to start unleashing bombs. We elected Joe Biden to give us $15 an hour, livable wages, to get rid of student debt. We didn't elect him to drop bombs. We just didn't do it. And I don't know. I'm just a little cynical about this guy. And while we want to be cheery and we want to see the rose petals on the road, we've also got to keep the feet to the pedal and keep this Biden-Harris administration honest, because their history is very clear. Both of their histories is beset with mass incarceration and anything but looking out for the underclass of America. And we have to deal with that. And when we look at the hit job they did do on Bernie and whatnot, I hope Bernie just keeps fighting and doesn't cave in. I hope AOC, Rashida, the squad, and others keep fighting. But right now, those progressives are going to find themselves isolated more and more, and they'll be catering more to someone who's more of a Republican than anything out of West Virginia. And we can't allow that type of individual, that type of ideology to mute those 82 million people or so that voted for Joe Biden. I don't know. I'm just real cynical about what is ahead of us. But there is good news. The University of Michigan basketball team is rated number 2 in the nation.
Oh, we finally went up. We finally went up to 2.
Yeah, went up to 2 as we speak. But and Cuomo, think about it. Cuomo is a Democratic version of Trump in terms of these behavior patterns. And all he's got to do, you say he may resign, but if he uses Trump as a role model, he'll just stonewall it. Weather the storm. Impeach him, if you will. See what's there. But if he weathers the storm, I believe he'll still be there. Now, if you beat him up so bad that he says, I got to go, it's just too much. That isn't what Bill Clinton did.
Right.
All I'm saying is that Mr. Grabham, Trump, is probably looking back, smirking like hell, because there's no bloodbath like a New York bloodbath. You'll see de Blasio in. You got a good man down, stomp him, kick him. That's what the mayor says. That's how the Democratic Party behaves. I just hope he doesn't come back to haunt us in different federal races down the road including the next presidential one. But New York's usually, as you know, safely for the Democrats. But right now, I mean, the sharks smell blood in the water, and it's Cuomo. And the guy, there's no question about it. He's, as the streets say, he's a dog, D-A-W-G.
Right.
He's just a straight up dog, busted. We keep organizing. We got our children to work with, our children's children to work with. And what I've learned now as an elder is that some of our role is just to, in the background, not get in the way of emerging leadership. One problem folks have as they mature is they get in the way of emerging leadership. We've got to grow, nurture that leadership. If you see the squad growing and maturing in the halls of the U.S. Congress, just because you have 30 years of seniority doesn't mean that you try to stifle them. Help them learn to work the system, but don't get in the way. But what happens is folks with seniority in Congress, seniority in the streets, seniority in the political parties, they tend to get in the way and try to stifle emerging leadership.
Right.
When I look at you, I look at myself, I believe that our role is to nurture this emerging leadership, but above all, not get in the way.
Stay
out of the way.
Yeah.
That's all.
Sam,
all.
thanks for having the last word here on our podcast today.
Oh, and thank you for enduring, and thank you, all of us that made it 25 million. Think about that. Yeah. That's why you did this show. Yeah. 25 million is one hell of an accomplishment. 25 million downloads because you're saying something. People are listening. You let them speak, and you've got a platform for folks that would not have a platform, but for you. So to you, I say, I love you, Michael Moore. Congratulations on the 25 million, and we'll get 25 more million in the pocket for you.
Thank you, Sam. It's very heartening, and I do appreciate everybody who's been listening this past year, and it tells me how much more work we have in front of us. But if we do it together, we'll succeed. On our own, not so much. But thank you for being there, always being there, part of the fight. Please come back on in the second year here of Rumble, and I want your voice heard.
Okay, love you, man. Take it easy.
Love you too. All right, take care.
Basil. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
Well, that's our podcast for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. And I will be back with you in a few days. Until then, let me thank our executive producer, Basil Hamden, our editor, Nick Quaz, all the people who contribute and help me, my friends, my family, and others. It's been a great first year or so here. We've reached many people around this earth that we live on. Thank you for those of you who have written to me, who've left voicemails. I encourage others who have not done that to do that. I listen to every voicemail. I read every email. And you can email me at the link that's right here on the podcast page, mike@michaelmoore.com. And you can click on the link down below here and send me a voicemail. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your reaction to Rumble. All of that is so welcomed. So please do that for me if you can. Email or voicemail. And I will see you soon. Thank you, everybody. I'm Michael Moore, and this is Rumble.